morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. My name is Kari Gunderson, and I am delighted to serve as your worship associate today, and to welcome you fully into this space. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies here. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you are bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome all of you. We extend a special welcome to each guest among us. Guests are warmly invited to attend the Inquirer session today, immediately after the service, in the parlor, to learn more about Unitarian Universalism and our church in a small casual gathering. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you, and drop it into the offering plate later in the service. You can also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary, where you will also find hearing assist devices and Braille hymnals. Additionally, a fragrance-free area is located in the first few pews on the front right side of the sanctuary. If you're a visiting family, including children or youth, after the time for all ages, please join in the children's recessional and head across the hall to the common room. There you will be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee and conversation in the common room. My name is Kari. You can come talk to me at the guest table. As a way to engage at First Church, I invite everyone to explore the announcements insert for the numerous opportunities available here. In particular, I will draw your attention to these. Stop by the religious education table today, starting today, to sign up for our annual Youth Gourmet Dessert Auction, which supports our Habitat for Humanity summer mission trip to Battle Creek, Michigan. The auction takes place on Sunday, May 12th, which is Mother's Day. Contact Youth Program Coordinator Deb Salas with questions. Join First Church's Black Lives Matter team to celebrate the life of Dontre Hamilton with the Hamilton family and the Coalition for Justice at Dontre Day on Saturday, April 27th, this coming Saturday, 12 to 6 at Red Arrow Park in downtown Milwaukee. Free food, music, much more. Join New Sanctuary Movement in Voces de la Frontera for May Day 2019, the day without Latinxes and immigrants' general strike and state mobilization at the Capitol in Madison will be this coming Wednesday, May Day, at 11 o'clock a.m. Excuse me. To urge the state legislature to restore driver's licenses and state ID cards for all in Wisconsin. Buses will be available to take people from Milwaukee to Madison. Contact the Immigration Action Group for more information. Please find details on these and more events in the announcements insert. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. Once again, I welcome you to First Church by inviting you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Our chalice today will be lighted by the 20 family, Nate, Leah, Jen, and Brett.
We gather on Easter morning, welcomed by the rising sun and hope. On this Sunday of the risen, may we welcome one another in all of life's complexities, realities, and mysteries. May we know both and, not as opposites, not as exclusive, not as the one and only story, but as relatives, kin, mysteries dancing with mysteries, joy dancing with sorrow, life dancing with mortality, beauty dancing with loss, death dancing with resurrection. Come, let us worship together. Will you please rise in body or spirit and join us in our opening hymn, number 61, Lo the Earth.
Good morning. The story that I have for you today is very old and has been told many different ways over the thousands and thousands of years. And it is about some of the ancient gods and goddesses of Egypt. Once upon a time, a long time ago, when the earth was new and everything was just beginning. The earth was covered with water. A mysterious egg floated on the water. Just one little lonely egg, and no one knows where it came from. When that egg hatched, Ra was born. Ra did not want to spend his time floating around doing nothing, so he flew into the sky and became the sun. As the sun, Ra shone brightly and dried up much of the water to reveal the land underneath. Ra was lonely shining down on this big world, so he made another person. Her name was Nut. Ra made many gods and goddesses to keep him company. He gave them all great responsibilities to care for the living things in this world. His children were very, very busy. Still, they took the time out to have their own children, because children are glorious things to have. Soon there were many gods and goddesses, and Ra was the father, or the grandfather, or the great-grandfather of them all. All children are glorious, but to Ra, one child was especially important. That child was his grandson, Osiris. Osiris had a brother named Set, and Ra thought that Set was okay, I suppose, but by far his favorite was Osiris. To show Osiris how much he was loved, Ra made Osiris the first pharaoh of Egypt. Osiris married Isis, his one true love, and Osiris and Isis settled down quiet and happily with their son, the prince, Horus. Now, Set, Osiris's brother, was terribly jealous. Why should Osiris be named Pharaoh and not him? So in a fit of anger, Set took his brother Osiris's life and chopped him into 14 little pieces, and he threw those pieces into the Nile River. Set was sure that he would get away with this, but Isis soon heard of what Set had done. Isis was brave, and she journeyed to find all 14 pieces of her beloved Osiris. She brought these pieces to her good friend Anubis, and Anubis was very clever. He managed to put all the pieces of Osiris together again. But he did not have the power to bring him back to life. He did not have the power to bring him back to life so that Osiris could retake his place beside his beloved Isis and rule Egypt as Pharaoh. When the great Ra heard about this, he was furious. So he gave Osiris a new job, an even better job. He made Osiris the god of the dead, which is one of the most important jobs of all. Osiris could rule over the land of the dead and be dead himself. In fact, he would have to be dead to enter the land of the dead, so things worked out very well, actually. When the young prince Horus heard what his uncle Set had done, although he was still only a boy, he tracked down his uncle Set and made him pay for his crime. Now, Horus lived a good life, yet it was filled with adventure, challenge, and sacrifice. Ra watched Horus over the years, and remember, Horus is probably his favorite great-grandson anyway. And when Horus was an old man, Ra was pleased with his life. Ra decided that he himself needed to retire from the job of being the sun and tend to his many, many great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So Ra bestowed upon Horus the job of being the sun. Of course, Horus accepted this with great enthusiasm. He had never been the sun before, and it would be nice to live what he thought would be a more quiet life. Ra decided that in the slow season, what we've come to know as winter, he would dip down into the land of the dead to visit Osiris before he retired. He took Horus along with him as a sort of men's family retreat. And because of this, the sun would no longer be in the sky to shine brightly and bring warmth to the earth. Ra and Horus stayed down in the land of the dead for 6 months as the world kept spinning. As that time passed, so did the seasons, until finally the season of rebirth came, what we know now as spring. Ra spoke to Horus and told him that now was the time for Horus to take his place as the sun. And when the time was right, and the birds began to chirp, and the animals began to build nests for the new babies they would have, when the trees started to bud and the tulips started to bloom, Horus made his grand entrance into the sky as the new sun, and he shone even brighter with great pride that his father and grandfather would always know where he was, and that he could always shine down on his mother, Isis. Now, as I mentioned before, this story is from ancient Egypt. And just for reference to the Africans who lived during that time, Egypt was known as Kemet. And the original names of Osiris, Isis, and Horus were actually Asar, Aset, and Heru. And this story is told a million different ways over the years. But my reason for telling it is to offer yet another story of resurrection. And when Ra went down into the underworld, of course, represents the winter equinox. And when Horus returned as the sky and the sun representing the spring. So let us celebrate the return of the sun, the resurrection of life, the rebirth of our identities, and the remembrance of the wholeness of love. We invite children and teachers to sing in verse 1 of the hymn and then continue to class as the congregation continues.
You may be seated. I'd like to invite you to join now in a time of contemplation, which will be followed by silence, followed by the seated singing of Spirit of Life. So just take a moment to settle in. Feel your body. Feel your sit bones pressing into the seat beneath you. Your feet resting on the floor. And the very top of your head connecting you to all that is. Turn your attention to your breath, moving in and out. And let it bring you into being here and now. Spirit of life and love, Holy One of our being and our becoming, that which is sacred within, among, and beyond us. May we know life this morning. May we know we are among the living. May whatever has been hurt or harmed within us be comforted, nourished by breath, healed by love. May we be blessed by complexity, by many stories, by both and may we be open to hope, inspired by new life rising, privileged witnesses to life's continual death and resurrection. May it be so.
Ron is in second place, but my best friend in life will always be my mother, Lorene Gunderson. In her last years, my Unitarian mom mindfully brought her coming death into her life. She saw my tears about her illnesses and about knowing that I was losing her. So she lovingly involved me in talks about possessions that she wanted to give me and her medical directives. She described her physical problems in matter-of-fact tones and asked me to change her dressings after surgery. Once I cried, telling her about an injustice from a conductor I was working with. She said, "Oh, Kari, life is too short to be this upset about such a trivial matter." This instantly shifted me into a different view. Another time, she watched my aunt shout angrily at my young nephew and then coolly said, "Is this how you want him to remember you?" Her talks about death with her friends included jokes. One was about a woman calling into the newspaper with a long, glowing obituary about her husband. When told that there was a flat fee per word beyond the 6 words, she said, "Oh, well, make that Abe Myers died. Buick for sale." During the last months of Mom's life, I called every day, making notes about events and ideas which would interest her. I loved anticipating the crisp wisdom of her keen mind. And I still find myself 11 years later, still having conversations with her in my mind, still nurtured by her presence.
In the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, Dr. Bettina Love writes, "Joy is crucial for social change. Joy is crucial for teaching. Finding joy in the midst of pain and trauma is the fight to be fully human. A revolutionary spirit that embraces joy, self-care, and love is moving towards wholeness. Acknowledging joy is to make yourself aware of your humanity, creativity, self-determination, power, and ability to love abundantly. Being whole doesn't always mean filling up the box that society wants you to fit. Gender, for example, isn't one or the other. It's more like the natural world. Earth's life didn't spring into flower pots and gardening beds. Some flourish in that environment, but finding the right space for a plant can mean the difference between a wilting sprout and a gigantic sunflower. Some plants do better without any attention, but others need careful nurturing. Every single plant is different, and the treatment that works well for one could kill another. I've learned this the hard way. The plant corner in my bedroom is haunted by the ghosts of many, many dead plants. Apparently, succulents aren't foolproof. At the very least, they're not me-proof. My name is Gus, and I'm non-binary. But I'm not in between 2 different choices. I'm not the secret third gender or one of Facebook's 58 choices. With the box I was put into, people expect something nice, something delicate, and they prepare accordingly. But maybe I'm a weed. Something that messes up perfect rows and carves out a space for itself. My roots go deep, and I'm not going anywhere. I've always liked dandelions anyway. I am wholly myself, and I'm proud to be that. When I got into high school, I started introducing myself with my pronouns. And I was lucky enough to find a group of friends, family, and teachers that supported me and respected my identity. However, a lot of teachers and students either don't care, intentionally go against, or forget about these choices. And you never know how someone's going to react if you correct them. Reactions have ranged from right, sorry, to someone actually calling me a snowflake in 2019. As far as I know, it was unironic. But I keep going. I surround myself with people that care about who I am. My friends who I would do anything for, and I know they feel the same. The adults that don't wave off my explanations and listen or help me along the way. I find other weeds, other people who feel like me. These people who have helped me find my place in the world do so with small gestures like consistently using my pronouns or comforting me through a rough day, which mean so much. And so I keep growing. I'm not perfect, and I don't speak for everyone like me, but I can find that joy that the aptly named Dr. Love talks about. And in a world that so often encourages efficiency over creativity, objective perfection over something sprouting, pessimism and cynicism over positivity, finding joy may be one of the most revolutionary things you can do. Being a little messy, a little wild, and finding your own way out of the box that you were put in, that's rebellion. That's freedom. In spring, we celebrate renewal and the discovery of things we knew in the back of our minds were there all along. We see the world becoming green instead of gray, the variety of life instead of sticks, snow, and dead leaves. Things that were dead are reborn, things that were potential become actual, things that are part become whole, and we celebrate. And almost none of that fits into a rigid structure. It changes constantly, just like us. The constantly shifting nature of the world means that even the straightest of lines won't last forever. Wood warps, cement erodes, and the natural world takes back its own. And we must see this shifting in ourselves and in the freedom to exist without limitations. Thank you.
One of our Unitarian Universalist national leaders, Alex Capitan, tells the story that Alex heard from Kate Bornstein, who's a non-binary author and teacher. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, God was bored. God needed a project. So God created a world. And God created Lilith, but she was a little too much to handle, so God sent her on her way and created Adam and Eve. And God made them a garden and told them, everything you need is here. Go anywhere you please, do anything you want, be happy and fulfilled. Oh, and there's just one little thing though, God said. All that I ask is that you not eat those pretty looking apples on that gnarly tree over there, okay? Well, before you know it, a serpent showed up and seduced Eve into eating an apple, and Eve in turn convinced Adam to take a bite. And as the story goes, they were instantly aware of their nakedness and were ashamed. God realized what had happened and came to see them. But God wasn't mad. God was profoundly sad. God had not wanted Eve and Adam to eat from that tree because it was the tree of good and evil. And as soon as they ate from it, they were aware of the binary of good and evil, and they were seduced by that binary. Once they were stuck on the idea that good and evil is a binary, that good and evil are mutually exclusive, utter opposites, all nuance was destroyed. All things had to be either good or evil, with no overlap, no other options, no complexity. This was our fall from grace, believing that good and evil is a binary, that good and evil are fundamental opposites, and that we can use this system to know what is safe and what is unsafe. Then we connected all sorts of what we assumed to be binaries back to that same system of good and evil, safe and unsafe. Binaries like civilized and uncivilized, Christian and heathen, rich and poor, white and black, able and disabled, male and female, straight and gay. In each case, and these are just a few, as you know, one of the so-called opposites is considered good and right and safe and normal, and the other one is considered wrong and evil and unsafe, and even sometimes subhuman. The 2005 scholarly journal article called Transcending Polarization Beyond Binary Thinking by Jack Denfield Wood and Gianpiero Petroligieri explains the brain chemistry that's underneath this kind of binary thinking. When we observe anything, when we use our eyes and ears and mouths and brains to observe something, that information comes in through our senses and it's sent to both the cortex, which is up here, and the amygdala, which is sort of in the middle and in the back, at the same time. Now, the cortex is responsible for complex logic and for rational thinking, while the amygdala is designed for fight or flight responses. And even though the information is sent to those two parts of the brain at the same time, the amygdala is just a lot faster than the cortex at processing it, and it only has two responses: good or bad, safe or unsafe. So whatever information is sent to both of those parts of the brain, the amygdala labels it good or bad faster than the cortex can even identify what it is. Well, this is an evolutionary safety mechanism designed to keep us from bears and cliffs, According to Wood and Petroligieri, when the brain reacts in a binary way, it leads to quick, irrational decisions and actions. When a dialogue is eventually engaged between the emotional and rational parts of the brain, we can come to believe that reality is defined by two mutually exclusive categories. Events are thus construed as dilemmas to be resolved in favor of one alternative versus the other. I have seen our Unitarian Universalists commit these errors of thinking as often as anyone else. Turns out, in spite of our intellectual commitment to rationality, our amygdalas work at exactly the same faster than cortex speed as the rest of humanity's. It happens in our UU social justice world. It happens in our theology. It even happens in our welcoming systems, which is the biggest bummer. Just like the rest of humanity, UUs categorize things in binary opposites linked to safe and unsafe, good and evil. Now, some of our binaries are countercultural. Binaries like humanist versus theist and woke versus oppressive. And some of them participate in the same larger structural oppressions of binary opposites that the rest of society buys into. Opposites like male versus female, white versus black, cis versus trans, adult versus child, Christian versus queer, and objective perfection versus something sprouting. I find Easter to be one of the most interesting times to be a Unitarian Universalist. Our binaries and our complexities come into contact with another as we try to make sense of this religious holiday that comes from our religious roots. When we enter into this space, are we an either-or faith? Or are we a both-and faith? Are we Christian versus humanist? Are we a community that includes Christians and humanists? Do we talk about Jesus on Easter, or do we try and focus on the flowers? Are we rationalists, or are we mystics? And what, my dear friends, do we do with this story of resurrection? This Easter story, this story of Jesus' road rallying resistance to Rome through prosecution and torture and death and then resurrection, is a story of complexities rather than binaries. It's not only a story of personal sacrifice, it's also a story of political resistance. It's a story of mystery as well, a story of white linens, of empty tombs, of a stone mysteriously rolled away. It's a personal story, a story of who betrayed and who stayed. A story of a cock crowing 3 times and 3 committed women who kept steady. It's a story of both and, yes and, life and. There are so many complex ways to tell a story of resurrection. To swish and sway across the line of gray between life and death. Kari told us the story of how her mother consciously integrated mortality into living, and how even after her death, her presence lives on. Yesterday, my colleague, the Unitarian Universalist Reverend Lisa Hike, posted a poem about resurrection in Butte, Montana, that was based on a Radio Lab story. This is Reverend Hike's poem. In Butte, Montana, there's an open-pit copper mine that filled in with water after it was closed. It's a vast lake now, with water red and green and gray and black, containing sulfuric acid and heavy metals, deadly poisons all. For decades, nothing could live in the water and nothing could live on the shore. Every year, flocks of snow geese try to land on the lake, and every year, humans go out and make noise to try to scare them away. One year, despite the noise, several hundred landed there and drank the water, and the next day the birds were all dead. Autopsies showed they had been poisoned by the water. Many years later, scientists found a sticky black goo, a yeast, growing in the water and absorbing the toxic metals from it. A miracle, a breakthrough, an organism that can clean poisoned water. It took some time to identify it, but eventually the scientists realized that it had been seen once before in the digestive systems of the geese that had died when they landed on the lake. This morning, a local colleague is preaching another resurrection story. The story of the local queer and trans-affirming church rising up out of the global United Methodist Church's rejection. The new local church, planted by the Reverend Jonah Overton in River West just 3 years ago, began with Reverend Jonah sitting in local coffee shops and bars with a little sign that says, "I'm a pastor, wanna talk? First drink's on me." Slowly, they gathered young people looking for something new and life-giving. The church is named Zao, which means to live, to breathe, to be among the living. Now, Zao Milwaukee congregation has a worshiping community of almost 100 people. They're mostly millennials, intentionally multicultural, queer and straight, cis and trans, and radically welcoming. As you probably know, at the end of February this year, the General Conference of the Global United Methodist Church voted to aggressively pursue prosecuting LGBTQ clergy and to reject queer relationships in the church. So now this fledgling church plant, our neighbors, which is serving the needs of local young people, the unchurched, queer and trans folks, and people of color, is losing half of its funding in just over 9 months from now. They're furiously fundraising from their 100 young people, while also traveling around the state protesting the United Methodist LGBTQ rejection and organizing progressive United Methodist congregations around a new vision for the future of the church. Reverend Jonah's sermon this morning is entitled, Zao Lives. With our colleagues across town, the story of resurrection today is the resurrection of the church and of the spirits of those people who have been wounded by it, inviting them to return to life, to breath, inviting them to be among the living. It is as Easter and as non-binary as stories come, personal and political, oppression and resurrection, struggle and suffering and hope. And just like the Easter story, it is unfinished and unfolding. We tell stories of life and death and resurrection because they make meaning of our more complicated than binary lives? What has laid dead within you and is ready to return? What are the tiny, glorious resurrections of the Spirit upending the Roman order in your life? Where does your uprising intersect with the rising sun and grass and life around you, the rising up of the people in resistance to oppressive orders of control? Famous American organizer and author Grace Lee Boggs wrote in her opening chapter, "These are the times to grow our souls," of her book, The Next American Revolution. Radical social change can no longer be viewed in terms of transferring power from the top to the bottom or of simple binary oppositions. Us versus them, victims versus villains, good versus evil. We can no longer afford a separation between politics and ethics. Consciousness and self-consciousness and ideas and values have to become integral, both as end and as means to social struggle. Radical social change has to be viewed as a two-sided transformational process of ourselves as well as our institutions. Wholeness is not binary. We are both and, not separate from one another, not us versus them, not male versus female, not black versus white, cis versus trans, rationalist versus mystic. Those differences matter. They're things of power in this world, but they are not the only things that matter. We are all of them and more. We are large. We contain multitudes. We are sprouting and growing outside of these boxes. What has lain dead within us is waiting to rise. There is power within and among us, just waiting to be fed, waiting for us to connect the dots of separateness, to overlap the within and among and beyond, to align the ends and the means, waiting for us to transform ourselves and each other and our institutions and the world. With this complexity, with this power, may we rise. May it be so. Join in our responsive reading printed in your orders of service. This is adapted from Meditation on Opposites by Alex Capitan. May we see beyond our dependence on opposites.
To transcend our desire to know who is like us and who is not.
Open us to the knowledge that in this room there are complexities and diversities of identities.
Beyond black and white,
old and young,
woman and man,
poor and rich,
uneducated and educated,
disabled and able-bodied,
gay and straight,
ill and healthy,
wrong and right.
broken and whole. In this room, there are people who embody juxtaposition, who can tell stories written on their bodies about both and neither, who carry intimate pieces of truth that there is
No such thing as opposites.
spirit of many names and of no name at all.
Help us find release our belief that all things must be either or.
This belief that walls us off from one another.
Ensnaring us in the battle of same versus different.
Help us to open our minds
To deeply listen.
and to truly know one another.
Finally listening to the kaleidoscopic beauty of the divine.
And will you join in singing our closing hymn number 203? We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll sing